It is so cold out. It is ridiculous. Oh my God. Whoa, welcome to New York. This is my rented commercial space, as you see, in all its glory. Today we are going to discuss how to rent a commercial space. Not specifically how, but what you're supposed to look for when you rent a commercial space. The very first thing you should know with any space is who's your landlord. Because if you got someone good, and we do, in fact so good that he comes in here and even waters the plant for us, then everything gets a lot easier. If you have someone who doesn't want to work with you or is a stickler for rules and every little detail and every little thing that has to be to the book, it gets hard. You want a flexible landlord who's willing to work with you when things aren't always so easy. Okay, right now it's COVID time, people aren't paying their rent, and he knows that things are difficult, and he's working with us. And it's really, really, really good. This space is normally a huge classroom for youth who need help. And unfortunately with COVID, we can't do that anymore, so we converted it into a donation giveaway location, and all these suits are from Brooks Brothers, and we give them out to the youth. But in the meantime, this was a classroom, and I want to point out, what did it take to make this into a classroom here? It wasn't just bringing in all these desks and chairs, because when you have to, a lot more to it. First of all, the floor was raw concrete when we got here. We had to refinish this floor. Now, we just used a stain, which is the easy, inexpensive way to do that, but you could do a lot of finishes. The next door unit polished the concrete, which cost a fortune, and made it shiny. I can't really understand why, but they like that, whatever it is. Okay, when you come to a space, you also have to think about entry, exit. So we have a lot of youth going in and out of here. So we have the double doors. They both do open. And if you don't have a lot of people, it's not so important. But if you have a lot of people, more than we have, you also need a second exit or a means of egress, because that's a fire code thing. Right now we are doing fine with our fire code in this location, but a previous location we actually had to move out of because we had more students than could fit legally in the space enrolled in our program. So we exceeded the fire code. Well, we didn't exceed it, but we would have exceeded if we stayed there. And then we moved into here, which is a bigger space. Now, when we got here, this was a big room, empty. This room behind me that you see there wasn't there. We built that. Honestly, it was me and one other guy who built that in an afternoon. It wasn't that hard, actually. But the point is, you got to build these things, including putting up doors and framing and sheetrock and stuff like this. It's actually really easy if you're good at like DIY stuff. But that's one of the other things you got to think about when you move into a space. Do you need to install walls or tear them down? If you're not familiar with renting commercial spaces, tearing down walls is actually a very normal thing. Okay, now one of the other aspects that you have to think about is heating and air conditioning. This particular room has not one but two zones and double condensers outside. That's crazy. I mean, that is overkill for this room, and it's awesome because you have super heat, super air conditioning. You can see the vents right there over my head, some of the vents over there. So heating, air conditioning, not all places even come with it. You may have to install it yourself. That's very expensive if that happens. So keep that in mind. You want heating and air conditioning already there and sufficient for your capacity. We've had several previous spaces. This is not at all the first one. And one of the previous ones, they put in a 30,000 BTU air conditioning system, and it wasn't enough because the space was so large. So that's the thing. So that sounds like, oh my God, it's so powerful, and it wasn't. And when you have a lot of human bodies in the room, that wasn't enough. So that's another thing to be aware of. Another thing is signage. Okay, what are you allowed to do? In your internal space like this, you'd think you'd be allowed to do anything. You actually can't. When we first came in here, we stuck a big, huge TV screen in the window right over there facing the main street, and the neighbors complained when it was on at night. So we were able to keep it there for a while, and that TV actually stopped working, interestingly enough. I'm sure the neighbors were thrilled with that. But while it was working, we had to put on a timer because the neighbors complained at night from that building across the street that the light was keeping them awake at night. It was a really big 65 or 70-inch screen in that window. So that's another thing you have to be aware of. What signage are you allowed to do? Now, this is all inside the space. In this location, there's not really exterior wall space so much because it's all glass windows, but other places that you have that, are you allowed to drill into the concrete or the wall or the facade outside to put up your sign? that's a fair thing to wonder, you know? Can you make holes in the wall to install things? We don't have that problem here. We also don't have a lot of signage here, which is fine, because we had a sign here. I actually removed it because I needed to use it for another project. I mean, that's all visible from the outdoors, and so is other ones here. So everything's internal. It's not really an issue, other than maybe the TV that we put in the front window. Now the windows, that's another aspect. First of all, if you get floor-to-ceiling windows like we do, you have no idea how expensive it can get to hire people to keep cleaning them with Windex, because you got to do both inside and out. You don't really need the inside frequently if you don't use it the way we are, but with students, they touch the glass and put fingerprints up. So if you don't have a lot of human beings in your space, you don't necessarily need to do both sides, but you definitely need the outside regularly, and it's a big expense. Another thing is, do your windows open? Now, we're on a ground floor here, so we don't obviously have them open, nor would we want to, because anyone could just sort of walk their way in if we do that. But if you have windows, you got to know if they open. Are you allowed to open them? I was once working as a consultant in someone else's office, and I opened the window and they freaked out. They're like, no, the building doesn't allow it. I have no clue why any building wouldn't allow it, but that happens. So be aware that they may have regulations, and it usually comes from old windows in buildings that get new fire codes, and then for whatever reason they can't open the windows. Speaking of fire codes, do you have sprinkler systems? We do. It's pretty hard to identify the new kinds because they're almost invisible. It's those little discs up there on the, like, they're this big. They're discs this big on the ceiling. Should there, God forbid, be a fire, they will pop down and sprinkle some rain on you and ruin everything inside, but put the fire out. So we have them here. Make sure you have fire sprinklers or something else to keep you to fire code. In buildings that are pre-World War II in New York City, that means a fire escape out your window. If you have that, you have to worry that someone can climb up your fire escape, and you have to take proper security measures, keep the door locked or whatever you got to do. That's another aspect. Now, windows, doors, is the front door have a lock that you're satisfied with, meaning is your stuff secure inside the space with that lock? Are you able to change that lock without special permission from the building? And if you do change the lock, can you be the only ones with the keys, or do you have to are you obligated to give a copy of the keys to the super or the landlord? Now, in our situation, we like our landlord. We're very pleased with our working relationship with him, so there's no issue at all. We never change the locks. He still has the original keys, and we made copies for ourselves. Other places may not want the landlord going in and out. I could see that definitely happening in certain scenarios. So if you change the locks, are you allowed to do that without giving them access? That's another aspect. Next thing is restrooms, right? We got one huge one over there, and we used to have a second space 2 doors over from the same landlord, which we have let go, and he rented it to somebody else. I can't show it to you. It was literally just 2 doors over. We had both spaces when we had a lot of capacity of youth in our program. And that space had an additional restroom. So by doing that, we doubled the capacity, the restroom capacity. We would send, you know, if someone's in here, we'd send the youth to the other class. It's only next door. It's about 30 feet over. So that's another aspect. Do you have enough restroom space? What kind of renovations do you need to do? In this space, the restroom didn't need anything. In our previous location, it was an empty room with a toilet and a sink. So we had to install the paper dispensers. We had to install a towel rack. We had to install something to hold the toilet paper. I don't know why it didn't have all these things, but you got to think about those stuff. Okay. Next thing is, what kind of consumables are you going to need just to open the doors? You need toilet paper in your bathroom. You need paper towels in your bathroom. You need soap. All these little stupid things. I know it sounds stupid, but when you come around to it, they add up to being really like a task in hand, like just garbage bags. And get them sized to the right garbage. And what pails do you need? Okay. Next thing is noise. I don't know if you noticed the truck that passed me behind. You hear everything outside, and these are big, thick glass windows. It's not the fault of the building. It's the fault of the location. We are in New York City. To be exact, it's Long Island City, Queens, right off the bridge to Manhattan, and right over there is an above-ground subway. There's a subway that runs out there. Now we are far enough that we don't hear it. One of our prior locations, we were actually had a different subway running out the window that you did hear. And it was disturbing in the class, but not terrible, but it's something to be aware of. You have these noise things. If you're shooting like a vlog, like I am right now, and you got a lot of noise, that's a problem. Got to be aware of that. Is there planned construction? They just completed a construction right here Luckily, we didn't have class in session. If we did, it would be miserable. It was literally right out the window on those plates you see on the ground. They opened them up and were digging something in there. I don't know what they were doing, but it was literally right out the window. If we had class going, that would be really, really challenging to keep teaching over that noise. All right, another thing is electric. Are there enough plugs around the room? Now, by code, you're supposed to have a plug every 6 feet around every commercial space in New York City. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, codes, but if you don't, you gotta get an electrician to install them. That is expensive. Plus, you need to get the proper permits to do that, which is also expensive, at least in New York. So that's another thing, is do you have enough electric? How about your water? In the bathroom in this particular unit, there's no running hot water, there's only running cold water, and then there's an instant hot device that turns hot water immediately just for the sink. There's no other hot water in the unit. For us, that's totally fine, and it was here when we got here. Otherwise, you'd have to install that because nobody really wants ice cold water on their fingertips in the middle of a New York City winter. Other things you want to think about is if your space has a kitchenette, which our last one did. It was great. It was so convenient. We don't have that here. So instead we stick a little mini fridge and that's about all we get. But when we had the kitchenette, it was really good because our class times are like 5 hours long for the students. So it's a big deal for them. And the teachers sometimes do double shifts, so it's 10 hours. So it's like a big deal to have a kitchenette. It's convenient, it's nice. When it comes time to move into your space, are there any restrictions or limitations? Now we have the incredible convenience of having our own doors to go in and out. So, now I'm out and here it is and we move our stuff in. So it's not really a big deal for us. But if you have an elevator building, you might actually need to have more access during certain hours. They might limit you and tell you cannot move in during busy hours when people need to get in and out of the doors quickly. So that's important to realize. One of the other questions to ask is there a superintendent on site to fix things should they break? That's only important if you don't have the resource to do it. You may not really care, but if there's a water leak from an above unit, who do you call? Are they able to fix it, or do they have to call someone and then there's a delay? Now that delay, they might repair everything, but you might lose business during that time if you're closed because the water is coming down through your ceiling. I never had that in this location, but I did have that in another location. It wasn't a big leak, it was a very small leak just dripping, but it was a nuisance because we had computer equipment in that exact spot where it was dripping. We had to move everything and drag it out of the way, and they literally fixed it by the next day. But it's a nuisance. So you want to know if there's a superintendent who you can call to fix other things like that. Some of the other things you got to think about is just parking. Look outside. There are just constantly cars going back and forth here. This is New York City. There is a parking challenge here. There is a parking garage in this particular facility, which is a unique advantage, and it even has bicycle parking downstairs, locked, safe, secure storage for bicycles. That's a unique advantage of this location. Most of them don't have that in New York. Other places probably it's not even like an issue if you're in like the rural areas. Other aspects of noise is, do you have people outside who are going to come in and disturb you? People walking in from the street potentially who shouldn't really be in there, and you have to tell them to leave. Will you need a security guard if that's the case? It depends on your neighborhood. Other things are smells. Is there a place where odors come in? Like you right next door to a restaurant that cooks very strong foods? That could be. Another thing is insects. Mosquitoes was a challenge in actually our previous place. I don't know where they were coming from. We never quite figured it out, but we couldn't kill them all fast enough. Okay, I'm sure other insects are problems as well. This is ants, cockroaches, whatever else you got. You got to be aware, is there a source of these insects that you can't do nothing about, like a restaurant nearby? Like I'm looking right now because that car's honking and stuff. It's noisy here. It's Long Island City, Queens, New York. It comes with the territory. There's no space in this area that isn't going to be noisy though. So that's just kind of something you sort of take it and you eat it. Another thing is storage space. Now we built that room and we had this storage closet here and another storage. So we have enough storage space here, but if your building if you have needs for more and your building has like storage space subterranean, like in the basement that you can use, that's always great. Another advantage if you need it. Speaking of subterranean, where is your commercial space located geographically in height? Not geographically, altitude-wise. We are on the street level. This is considered as perfect as possible. You can't get better than street level for a commercial space. Sometimes people rent on the second floor. You could see right up there, they're renovating that second floor unit right across the street. There was a guy in there a few minutes ago. He's not there now. There was a guy in there a few minutes. I could see him from the window, literally renovating the space to prepare the second floor space. If you're on the second floor, everything that you bring in, you have to go upstairs with. Hopefully there's an elevator. If not, then you have a walk-up, and it's even a bigger hassle. But even with an elevator, when you move in stuff, it's annoying. It's a lot easier just to go right through the front doors. Now, if you really are cash-strapped, you can rent a subterranean location in a basement, and those things are dirt cheap because they usually have no windows. That's misery to work in, but it absolutely is the cheapest thing you could possibly get. Now, how about actually negotiating your landlord lease? First thing to know, which not everyone's gonna give you this information, when you rent a commercial space, did you know that they almost universally will give you a free month or two in the beginning to do renovations if you're signing a long-term contract? Believe it or not, free rent for the first month or two, that's completely normal, at least in New York. Almost everyone will do at least 1 or 2 months. You can sometimes negotiate longer if you want to do renovations, like building out walls and things like this. They know you need time and you can't make money during that time. You're, if anything, spending it on their space. That's totally normal to get free rent for the first 1 or 2 months of your lease period, okay? Or sometimes it's an extension and your lease period starts after the free time. Whatever it is, free time is totally normal. You also have to know any legalities. Are you allowed to use the space? Is it for what you're trying to do? Is it zoned legally for what you're doing? We have an attorney on our board. He checks all that stuff. I have no idea that part of the equation, but he checks that everything is legal, fire code capacity, all that stuff. But you have to check. Are you allowed to use the space as it's defined? Do you need any special licenses to operate? Do you need any insurances to operate? We got a whole portfolio of insurances because we're dealing with youth. So it is what it is. Not everyone needs that though. So basically the other thing is, what else do you got to do? You have to sign the lease, obviously. You have to have an agreement with your landlord. He has to give you the keys. When do you get the keys? It should be upon signing and giving your deposit. That's a normal arrangement. But basically, you need to get the lease agreement and then get your keys so you have access. Once you have access, is the electric running? Or do you need to call the electric company to turn it on? That takes several days sometimes for them to come. So you may have no electric in the beginning. That's normal. That's pretty normal, actually. You also may not have internet for a while. Like it takes, depending on where you are, even here in New York City, it could take up to 2 weeks to get it installed, which is nuts. We are in the 21st century, but that is the reality of how these internet service providers work. Especially if they have to run their own fiber cable, which they did in this space. They had to go through the basement, run up a fiber cable and drilling through the concrete upwards. I mean, God knows I'm glad I ain't the person who had to install that. But basically, it takes time to get internet. You have to be aware of that. You may not have internet right away. For us, it was a big deal because we had students coming to actually start classes, and we had to make sure the internet worked. So that was a very, very big deal for us. Any other forms of things that you need to be there in time for when you start. Make sure you're aware of all the requirements in order for you to operate businesses. Okay, if you have a commerce business, you're gonna need some form of cash register and all these things. You gotta buy all that stuff, or at least figure out a way to procure it if you don't already have it. Some of the other things you have to realize are security. We have little tiny cameras installed. You could barely even see them. They're white on a white background. You almost don't notice they're there. We install our own security system. You may need to install one better than ours. I don't know, whatever works for you, but you need to have security in most places. Depends what you're doing. So that's another thing to understand. Also, is there any repairs that need to be done when you get here? So this particular space was totally fine, but our last one, we got there and there were holes in the wall from the previous tenant, literally holes. We had to get a guy to come and plaster them up. Crazy thing. Also, painting the walls is totally normal. In our case, in order to get the security system, we also had to run network cabling through the ceiling, which was a bit of an ordeal because these ceilings, I believe, are 12 or 15 feet high. They're super tall. Like, they're nowhere near reaching it. Like, we need a super tall ladder just to get up there. Luckily, lighting, that's another one. What kind of lighting do you have? Is the lighting sufficient? The lighting in here is off the hook. These are LED lights. They don't burn out and they like to join up. Hold on, let me just show you what this is. This is our storage room, so it's a little messy, but you could see when I like to join up, the whole place just lights up. And because they're LED, I can't really show you on the camera, because they're LED, they're instant on and instant off. So that's kind of a lousy demonstration, I realize. But instant on, instant off lights are actually very convenient. They don't flicker. If you use the old fluorescent ones, they start flickering, and then you have a job in the middle of your workday that can start flickering, and you got to get on a ladder and start changing them. LED lights are incredible invention and are highly recommended for just the lack of maintenance. You don't need to touch them, they just work and they instant on, they don't flicker, they don't give you problems. If you don't have that, and you have all these lights like we do across the whole ceiling, you're gonna find that you're gonna spend your time on ladders changing bulbs. It's a pain in the neck. Also, if you don't have enough light, you have to install more. That's another hassle to deal with. Now, another aspect is garbage, okay? What do you do with it when you're done? In a private residential complex, you typically throw it down a trash bin or put it in a designated spot. With commercial, you don't have that designated spot a lot of times, and you literally have to pay for trash pickup, and you coordinate it with a private company who comes and you put out the garbage on a specific day and they come and you got to pay for that. You have to pay for the trash pickup. It's not automatic or free. Also, if you have a ground level space like we do, who is responsible for cleaning snow if you live in a place where you get snow like we do here in New York? If there is any other element on the sidewalk that you have to maintain, like garbage, like that people litter and stuff, is it up to you to maintain it? In our particular arrangement, we don't. We don't have anything to do with it. In other places, you have to do that. You have to be ready to have someone come and clean the sidewalk and shovel it if it snows, all that stuff. That's another headache that you have to maintain. In terms of noises, there's also another aspect, okay? If there's a machine out your window, like an air conditioning unit from a neighbor, you have no control over that and you might suffer that noise endlessly and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's something to be aware of when you choose your rented space, okay? There's other things that you cannot always be aware of, but if you keep your eyes open, your ears peeled, you'll notice. If there's a school nearby, what time do they let out? Because when they do, there's gonna be a huge amount of kids going by your space and potentially making a whole ton of noise. So if we are teaching classes here, so noise is significant to us, that may not matter to you. We have a truck go by right this moment as I'm talking to you, okay? We feel the vibration in here. If you were doing some fine work with like jewelry, like very tiny jewelry, that vibration might be a problem. Be aware of your surroundings and what it takes. If you have a police precinct right next to you, then you're gonna hear sirens all the time, or a fire department, or a hospital, or anything where there's sirens, you're gonna hear that stuff all the time. Be aware and be okay with it, or don't rent that space out. Now, in our space, we are lucky that we control our own heating and air conditioning, and we have even a double unit, so we have double the power, superpowers. In other spaces, it may be controlled by the building, and it even may be on a timer. You may not have heat or air conditioning after hours, so if you tend to work late, you might be freezing your bones, you know what I'm saying? Or boiling hot on the summer days. Okay, make sure that either you control the HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, or it's hours that you can agree to and acceptable. I've been in people's office where the heating and it goes off after a certain hour in the winter and it starts to get cold. Okay, at 7 p.m. it's like an ice box in there. That building is being cheap. They don't want to heat it and they don't want to give access to the tenants to do anything about it. I've been in people's office like that. It's not fun. Okay, so if you have after hours usage of the space, be aware what the limitations are. Also, if you have limitations to what you can do in the space, make like noise. For us, noise is a significant factor, but also there's human beings living above. There's residential units above our unit. If we were here in the middle of the night making a lot of noise, they would complain. We don't have that kind of operation as a classroom for youth, but I'm saying if someone wanted to build like a nightclub or a bar, that would be a problem. So there's that aspect as well. Now let's talk dollars. Money, 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 money. How do you negotiate the contract for a commercial venue? Number one, okay, as I mentioned before, you get a few months free in the beginning to do renovations. Try to negotiate that as high as possible. Number two, how do you analyze the actual price of your space? It's not calculated the same way residential rents are. You don't have a monthly rent in the same way that you would just rent an apartment and they would say one bedroom is this, two bedroom is that. With commercial space, the price is how many dollars per square foot per year. So like $30 a square foot per year is how they mathematically do this. And if you want to be able to calculate apples to apples, then you need to just be aware of the pricing model. So $30 per square foot per year is considered low in New York. Somewhere else someone's going to fall off their chair. But that means 1,000 square feet is $30,000 a year. But if you want to do apples to apples, it's per square foot per year, not per month like most residential units, where they'll say say this is a 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom apartment and it costs X amount per month. This is per year per square foot. Now, why is that significant? Because a lot of times they'll let you subdivide the space. So let's say this location I'm in right now had a second doorway, which it doesn't, but if it did, on those panels of glass right over there, then you could put up a wall theoretically right here in the middle and turn this into 2 different spaces and potentially rent only half of it, paying only for the square footage in your half. So this particular space I'm in right now, including the storage areas, is something like I think 12 or 1,400 square feet. So if you divide it in half, you're paying somewhere 600 or 700 square feet. You're literally paying half the rent. That's the whole thing. So you have to be aware that they will often let you subdivide it, and your rent is paid by how many square feet you take, and the actual calculation is annual per square foot, not monthly like a typical residential rent. That's key to understand when you do apples to apples comparison on rent. It's also important to understand when people say, how much does it cost? They're like, $40. And you're gonna go, $40? What the hell is that? No, it means $40 per square foot. So the next question that you need to be asking is, how many square feet is it for $40? Okay, and then you have to do the math if you wanna figure out your monthly rent and go, how much is that per year? You have to divide it by 12, okay? Multiply by the square footage and divide by 12. Now, the other aspect is you have a deposit. It's totally normal. Now, until recently, a lot of landlords ask for 2 months deposit, but actually that's become illegal in New York City. Other places may not have that. They cannot ask for more than 1 month deposit at this point, legal-wise. So that's a new law from about a year ago. So basically, 1 month deposit is normal, but they also make you pay for the first month of rent in advance. So when you walk in the door, you are guaranteed to pay the first 2 months down, guaranteed. So if you don't have double the first month's rent, don't rent the joint. Go find something smaller with less square footage that costs you less per month. Now, another aspect is when you reach the end of your lease, make sure there's an option to renew if you are not running a pop-up shop, which is the only reason you wouldn't want to renew, okay? If you don't have an option to renew, technically, the landlord can evict you at that point, and you can, go fight with him over it, but you want to have an option to renew. It doesn't necessarily have, not every commercial lease has an option to renew. It's not a normal thing the way it is in a residential unit. So that's another aspect. And then the other element of renewal is, are you renewing at the same rate or at a higher rate or some other aspect like that? Know what you're getting into, because you're investing in renovating the place. You want to make sure that that investment isn't going to get thrown away. Also, check for clauses that let the landlord evict you at will. Okay, a lot of these nasty landlords will stick a clause in there that says if they want to sell the place, they have the right to evict you on 30-day notice. Horrible. Always remove that. Always remove that from every lease, residential or commercial. Okay, I've had a nasty landlord of an apartment I rented for myself personally, residential, and he tried to exercise that. Boy, I was really aggravated because I paid a real estate agent to a finder's fee for that apartment, and the nasty real estate nasty landlord tried to utilize that. I ended up getting out of that and keeping the apartment, but boy, that's not a fun situation to realize. I learned that the hard way. You should learn from me. Don't do what I suffered through, okay? Make sure there are no way for the landlord to break that lease without at least giving you a ton of money, meaning they have to refund your whole lease term or something obscene like that, and then that will be a preventative measure to stop that from happening. On those really fine words, go rent yourself a nice, awesome space. I love this space, really do. My heart's in it. And like, share, subscribe, share this with everyone you know. If they've never rented an apartment, a commercial space before, show them this video, because this joint is awesome. I love that I rented this place. I love that we have a really nice landlord who makes life easy, because when you have bad landlords, it really is difficult. So everything is good, thank God, here. Okay, it's not always been good. I've had lousy spaces too. So on that fine words, please share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace!
Yeah!